Hello, Tabernacle family. Great to be with you again on another midweek message. We are continuing our walk through the book of Ecclesiastes, a fine book. I gave you a bunch of reasons why we should study it last time that we met and sort of came through a little bit of the prologue, verses 1 through 11 of chapter 1. So if you haven't turned there yet, by all means, Ecclesiastes chapter 1. While you're turning there, a couple of announcements for you. First, we'd love to see you out at our quarterly business meeting. That's January 13th, about 8 o'clock. We'll have a Zoom address posted for you next week, shortly before the meeting, Monday, Tuesday, something in that neck of the woods. So hopefully we'll see you there. And also a big thanks for those who came out to our days of prayer. What a joy that was. So Monday, despite the snow, we saw a bunch of people out on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and we really appreciate those of you who came, and really different people all throughout the week. And some, even like we said, some came for a few minutes, some stayed the whole hour, and all of that is fine. The big thing is we want to be a praying people. So thank you for praying. I know some of you who watch are not yet quite comfortable coming in, and I'm also confident that you too are praying along with us. And let's not be under any delusions that days of prayer means now that those are over, we should stop praying. I think we know that, right? So looking forward to continuing in prayer with you. Our Wednesdays are still open for prayer. We'll be doing those through Zoom as opposed to meeting in person for the foreseeable future. So we'll look forward to doing that with you as well, 6:30s on Wednesday. All right, Ecclesiastes. Let me read this text to you on the Vanity of Wisdom. Are you ready? Whew, this is grim. Here we go. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It's an unhappy business that God has given to the children of men to be busy with. I've seen everything that is done under the sun. Behold, all is vanity. It's a striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be counted. And I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. My heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and know madness and folly. I perceived. This also is but a striving after the wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Ooh, Selah, right? It's kind of a rough one. I figured maybe the way that we would approach this is instead of going verse by verse, we'll sort of take it thematically. It hangs together. You catch the thought, right? And maybe we'd start just by exploring the author again for a minute. We did this a bit last week, and you know that I landed on this idea that it's probably Solomon. So think about that for a moment. Solomon is talking here. This is the best candidate for the job, right? I mean, he's a type of Christ, isn't he? Really, there's only two places in this entire book that typology could be used. Here's one of them, Solomon. The next one you run into is in chapter 12. Going to be a while before we get there. Solomon, a type of Christ. Well, how? His name, Shalom, means peace. So here is the King of Peace. And you recall he's the king in Jerusalem, Jerusalem. This is the city of peace. This is the one renowned for his wisdom. And you'll recall that in Christ are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, that Solomon was a type of Christ. There's a problem, I suppose, with typology, in that the type is never sufficient, is it? And it doesn't matter if it's a tabernacle or if it's David, in this case, if it's Solomon, they all fall short. And so here we are seeing this King of Peace, this prototype of wisdom, and yet he falls short in this passage. And it leaves us longing, not for the type, but for the substance, for the truth that's found in Jesus Christ. It says here, Solomon, I the preacher, the one who's gathered this assembly together, the one who's convened this ecclesiastical council, right? Ecclesiastes. I set about to search out wisdom. And he says that in so doing, he was greater. In verse 16, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were in Jerusalem before me. Seems like he's done pretty well. Some people actually take that verse as a sign that this is not Solomon, because it seems like there's this great string of kings in Jerusalem, so surely it couldn't be Solomon, etc., etc. I find that rather unpersuasive. Remember that Solomon was king in Jerusalem, and he says that his wisdom is greater than all who were before him. Think about how searching that phrase is. Who was before Solomon? Well, David, a king of no small substance. You remember, this is the man after God's own heart. Solomon saying, you know, all the stories about David that you've been hearing. I mean, David cast a long shadow, didn't he? I'm surpassing David in my wisdom. The sweet shepherd of Israel. I've found out more than he, in fact. And not only that, but you recall that Jerusalem was not built by David. It was conquered by David. And so think of these Jebusite kings who were in Jebus or who were in Jerusalem before him. That's a long line of kings. In fact, one of these kings is probably known to you, and you met him when you were studying Abraham. Do you remember Melchizedek? Melchi, this means the king, Melech, of Zedek, this king of righteousness, who also is a type of Christ, by the way. Hebrews makes that blatantly clear. And so Solomon is saying, you know that this city has been renowned for wisdom, and I'm more advanced, more attuned to finding wisdom, whether it's the wisdom of Israel or the wisdom of the Jebusites. I am more advanced than all of this. I've really searched it out. If anybody can find it, I'll be the one. So maybe we could turn from the searcher to the search itself, because we're all kind of asking some pretty basic questions here as to the meaning of life, as to the purpose of life, as to why are we here? Why do things work the way they work? What does ethics look like for a people gathered together? And as we look for this, Solomon's guiding us right now. But there's a very key phrase that I want you to hear, and it happens repeatedly throughout this book. You heard it. Verse 13, I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom. By the way, that's reflecting the language of Proverbs 2:4, where we are to seek for wisdom like it's silver, to search it out like his hidden treasures. So Solomon is saying, I know we're supposed to seek and to search, and I'm doing that. But where is he doing it? So he says, I've said it to seek and to search by wisdom all that is done under heaven. That's a very key phrase. It's an unhappy business that God has given. By the way, note that. God has given. And that phrase is going to really drive home some important points. It's going to be a few weeks before we get there, so I'll leave it as a cliffhanger right now. But you can read towards the end of chapter 2 if you want to read ahead a little bit. He's searching everything under heaven, and he's finding it's this unhappy business. Verse 14, I've seen everything. It's a pretty wide scope for the search here, isn't it? And I've seen everything that's done under the sun. So catch who it is who's searching, Solomon. Now catch the scope. It's as broad can be. There's no stone that's left unturned. He's looking and looking and looking, and he's not finding it. But not only the scope or the extent, but look at the source of this wisdom. Under heaven, under the sun. Yes, it's broad. He's looking all around, but it's kind of like he's made an assumption that this life is a closed system, and that all that can be found out about this life must be found within this life. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do. And you'll find that there are people who have tried it. In fact, I wrote down a number of quotes from some of our modern philosophers of various disciplines. Last week I was reminding us of some of these who are of the French stripe, whether it's Derrida or Huxley or a variety of other ones here, Camus or Foucault, all these guys. Here's some others. Famous astrophysicist, you know him, Stephen Hawking. He was grasping for truth. And he said this: "We are just an advanced breed of monkeys on a minor planet of a very average star, but we can understand the universe." Did you catch the broadness of that claim? He has agreed with Kohelet right now, with the preacher right now. He said, let's just look under the sun. Let's just look under heaven. And let's look at everything. And let's see what we come up with. Now, Hawking has said, we can understand, but, according to his own game, these things ought to be subject to peer review. So let's look at what some of his peers have said, like Richard Dawkins, for instance. Similarly, he's, of course, atheist, you know him, evolutionist. He's concluded that human evidence is, and he quotes here, neither good nor evil, neither kind nor cruel, but simply callous, indifferent to all suffering, and lacking in purpose. So here's one guy saying, I'm sure we can understand, let's just keep looking. And here's another guy saying, look all you want, but I don't see any meaning, any substance. The late Bill Provan was actually very bold in saying this, and he was a professor at one of our universities right here in New York. But he would commonly try to disabuse his students of this notion that there's meaning and purpose in life, that there is no meaning, he would say. And then he'd try to make this about face and say, and life can be happy, which is really disjointed. The idea would be you create your own meaning. Well, if you're creating your own meaning, how meaningful is it? Let's say that I create meaning, and my meaning is I want to be a goat. Well, that's so meaningful for me. Why is that meaningful? At root, you'd have to ask, what are you doing? Francis Schaeffer was fond of saying that really it's in the heart of mankind. All of us desperately long for meaning in this life. In fact, when we get to Ecclesiastes 3, God has set eternity in the heart of man. We know we're here for something. To kind of quote another discipline, the modernist poet, this is Ezra Pound, he said, all my life I believed I knew something. One wonders if he's been reading Stephen Hawking. But then one strange day came when I realized that I knew nothing. Yes, I knew nothing. And so words became void of meaning. Now here's a man who spent his life writing, and he says, I knew nothing. Why? Because it's this closed system that they're looking in. It's under heaven. And so Kohelet, and I'll call him that, that's the preacher, that's who I believe is Solomon, is looking around, and he says, I tried by my wisdom, and with all the wisdom that I could muster, I realized that I was not able to gain anything ultimately. Now he gets to chapter 2, and he's going to say that you can gain something relatively by wisdom, but we'll see where that lands him in a couple of weeks. But ultimately, by all of his wisdom, he can't find anything. So then you come to the end of this passage, and he says, well, verse 17, so I applied my heart to know and to know. I applied my heart to know wisdom, and that was exhausted. And so I applied my heart to know madness and folly. He's just searching everywhere. And if you look at that word for madness and folly, I want you to think of it in this proverbial sense, right? The fool has said in his heart, how Proverbs talks about a fool. There's a negative, immoral connotation here. It's not that he's saying, so I became a madman and stormed about. Makes you think of Nietzsche. More than that, it's this idea where you're saying, I acknowledged the godlessness of my endeavor. I acknowledged that what I'm doing is separated. The fool has said in his heart, no God. And so what did I find? Well, you, saint, might say, well, obviously, you found nothing. It's the equivalent of you knowing that you have a sickness. Do we not have a sickness of the soul? And so you're desperately searching for medicine. And so you enter a shoe shop and you search all over for medicine and you don't find it. And so you conclude that the shoe shop is worthless. Well, that's fundamentally wrong because shoe shops are marvelous things. If, say, you want work boots or running shoes or spikes, but they're woefully inadequate when they're used for that purpose for which it was never designed. You are looking in the wrong place. And so here are these really brilliant people, Dawkins and Hitchens and Hawking, and you could add to the list. I should probably include Dennett in there, Four Horsemen, But you have all of these people who are just brilliant people, smarter than I'll ever be. I concede that gladly. But they're looking in the shoe shop. And what we should conclude from this is not, therefore, the brilliance of humanity is worthless. What we should conclude is that it's being wrongly used for ends that it was never designed. What if instead you turned your search elsewhere? Solomon is just brokenhearted for all of this. And you have these words like vanity, hevel. It's just smoky. It's like he ran desperately all about his backyard trying to catch the wind in his bare hands. And finally he sits down in a slump of exhaustion. Well, that's the wrong methodology. It's the wrong pursuit. It's perhaps the wrong question. If you've ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there is this deep thought. Remember this machine? And they ask it to come up with the meaning of life. What is the meaning of life? And so 7 million years, it's churning and churning and churning, and finally, bloop, it spits out the meaning. And the answer is 42. And the people are like, 42? What? And they're just all irate about the whole thing. And they're like, you did something wrong. It's like, oh no, I'm very convinced. I've precisely calculated everything. Perhaps you've been asking the wrong question. And this is exactly the right point. You may have been asking the wrong question, or even better yet, looking for the answers in the wrong places. You come to a verse, it just breaks your heart, like verse 15 here. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Hence, you find that there's poverty. And so you declare a war on poverty, and you declare a great society, and you build projects and homes and programs. And what are you left with? Poverty. You declare that communism is a utopia, is a bright future, is forward mobility. And what are you left with? The death of tens of millions of people. You declare, and it's not like it's any one system. Choose your system. I've been reading through Jean-Jacques Rousseau recently, and all of his social contract theory and all of this. And yet the man is morally bankrupt. And for all his talk about liberation, what do you get? The French Revolution. And you have the monarchy being hanged on the entrails of the clergy as a result of all of his self-love. By the way, there's so much talk about self-love today. Go read Rousseau for self-love and watch how he discards all 5 of his children to St. Vincent de Paul, this orphanage with thousands of people. It doesn't even name them, doesn't even record the year of their birth, much to the hard persuasions of his wife to the contrary. Well, pardon me, mistress. Talk about self-love. It's crooked. It's unstraightenable. And so here Kohelet stands back and he says, all of you behold the unstraightenableness of life. It's lacking. You can't fill it up. There's no supply big enough. All the water runs into the sea and yet it's not full. Behold the unsatisfiableness of life, the unanswerableness of your pursuit under heaven. And so those who have ears to hear what the Spirit says to the churches think, well, if you can't find meaning under heaven, perhaps you should lift your gaze to heaven, to Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And I walk away from this encouraged to find real wisdom and meaning and pleasure and pursuit in Christ alone. And I walk away from this with my heart opened in compassion to all of those men and women who have not yet found that in Christ. Spurgeon famously quipped, he was just one beggar trying to show another beggar where to find bread. Exactly. You found the bread of life, friend, if you found Jesus Christ. And so would you then help those who are stumbling about, woefully depressed? No small surprise that these rates of anxiety and depression are on the rise here in our land. And you have hope for them. Part of the way you give them that hope is showing them the vanity, the hevel of their endeavors apart from Christ. This week, it's wisdom apart from Christ. But the author of Ecclesiastes is not done bursting the bubbles, exposing the futility of the idols upon which we lean. So, more to come. But until then, may God richly bless you.